A user needs to know what's clickable and what's not, what's tappable and what's not. And the way to signify what is and what isn't clickable is with interactive text. That can be links, actions, buttons, input fields, really anything that you can start manipulating with. Something that's not read only, something that can be changed, I would consider interactive text. And the meaning of your interactive text, that's going to typically vary from project to project, but as long as you have interactive text, you're going to let people know that, hey, you can interact with this. So let's take a look at some examples. All right, first thing I've got here is the superfriendlydesign.systems website, and we're just going to take a look at basically a black and white layout here with a little bit of color to indicate navigation. Now, that's probably the simplest form of link color on the internet, aside from maybe Google. But in any case, we've got these navigation items, and it clearly has a rollover effect and some active links going on. Nothing too crazy groundbreaking here, but it is worth to note that this navigation up here doesn't necessarily look like a clickable body of text. It doesn't, just because it's black, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's clickable, because they actually look, the actual visual style is the same as some of the body copy. But because it's simply at the top and there's a row of items, we've become accustomed to that pattern enough to know that that means clickable text. Up at the top, that's going to be the navigation, regardless of what it looks like or not. So you kind of get some passes with certain components and certain elements because it's been around for so long, it's just kind of inherited that meaning. So even though we have these nice blue line effects, if we were to put lines under all of these, it wouldn't be as nice and clean, because you got this nice big block of negative space and it just kind of has like a nice clean look. So these are just a simple navigation example. And then if you scroll down, you have the actual link styles, which are underlined with blue. So it's more of a box shadow that's probably animating versus a border. And then the same kind of styles here. So kind of a nice, simple navigation style. And then same thing down here. Okay, so that's just a quick look at interactive navigation, some navigation elements. What about an application that's not a website or a marketing site? Let's take a look at the Instagram change password website web page. So you can see here, all of these links are actually, they don't really look like links, but again, because they're in the sidebar and they're in a row, we kind of know that they're going to be links. And you have the bolded font here to let it know that it's active. This is a screenshot, or otherwise I would hover over that. And then for here, we have forgot password, which is going to link to another page. So this is treated slightly differently because it's kind of going somewhere else, versus links in this section. These are more like, they're almost like tabs, even though they're not necessarily designed as tab elements. That's essentially what they are, because they're just changing this view over here. So they're interactive based on their position and some of the active state, versus adding a huge amount of color or adding a big giant tab around it. Whereas if you were to just put black text here, it's not really going to do the same, even though we are defining black text over here as interactive. It would be out of context right here, and it would almost seem like just readable text. So they're bringing in that primary kind of blue color, which is reversed out for the change password big call to action. And so we've got one interactive text, two interactive text right in here. And then down here, it might be a little hard to see, but it's like a dark blue that's like kind of the Instagram brand color. So there's three different interactive text colors here, and that doesn't even necessarily include the interactive text inside the input field, which would be another one. And it's interactive because there's a field around it. It makes more sense, but it's only interactive because it has that border and that background. Otherwise, it would just feel like a label. So there's different little tweaks you can make in different contexts to make things feel interactive depending on what the component is. All right, looking right here at the medium.com settings, this is another example of just kind of a black and white setup here. And same thing, there's a bunch of links here on the left that if it was in a paragraph format, you might not necessarily think to click on that because these are actually lighter in color than the body copy, but they are larger, so that helps a little bit. And the active is bold, and actually that's not the active, that is the title for this navigation. But yeah, so all of these are interactive because they're in a sidebar. So you don't really necessarily have to go crazy with your sidebar elements as opposed to hyperlinks where you would need to have an underline or a color to kind of differentiate them. So down here, you can see where they have deactivate account and delete account. In most applications, you would see this as like a red color because it's more of like a danger zone kind of area. But since this is medium, and I guess they're wanting to stick with that kind of nice newspapery feel, they've decided to go with this light gray, deactivate, delete account. And then some of their other ones are, light gray with that border around it to let you know there's more of an action associated with it versus kind of a link to another web page. And in this example on github.com, this is if you go into a repository settings. This is where I have the beta web page hosted. They have a sidebar that it's very apparent that you can click on these because they're blue. They have a hover state. It's a lot more... there's a lot more of an affordance that you can actually click on these. In terms of accessibility, this is a lot more usable. Someone else might get confused with just a black and white sidebar. So these are some things that you have to keep in mind when you're designing, what audience you're designing for and what level of accessibility do you want to hit. And if you look at these buttons, these are other examples of interactive text, but it's extremely interactive because it's got the border around it. It's got a gradient. It's got a color. It's got a border. And they're bolded fonts. They're a little bit larger. So you can tell that it's interactive because it's got a background color. It looks like a button. But down here, I do want to point out, they make their destructive actions, which are also interactive. They're using the same button style, but just making the text red because they want to make sure that you know that this is the danger zone. Depending on the context for which they are presenting the button, they're going to use a slightly different style. They want you to upgrade right here to enable certain things for the issues or the sponsorships. They make this very called out so you can get set up with that. And then down here, they also have another upgrade now, call out. But then down here, it's very different because if I click this, it's going to delete the repository. And actually, it's not going to. They give you are you absolutely sure? Unexpected bad things will happen if you don't read this. This cannot be undone. So you actually have to type in the name of the repository and click this to actually delete it. And again, it's the same interactive color, that red with the red background. Those subtle changes make you know that this is something very specific is about to happen. And they're doing that with red color. And if you're completely colorblind, this would work as well because it's going to be a dark contrast and you can still read the text. It is worth noting though, with links specifically, there are some guidelines for the web content and accessibility guidelines. So they say that use of color is not used as the only visual means of conveying information, indicating an action, prompting a response, or distinguishing a visual element. All right, so now I want to pull up another example. This is from an old client project of mine called Rivalry. And if you look right here, you can see that there's kind of a rainbow of colors going on. And the way this app would work is it's kind of simple, almost dumb in a way. And the people who made this would also admit that. But you basically pick your college football team that you are a fan of, and you then heckle your most rivaled teams with your friends. And so basically anytime you click one of these buttons, it sends a push notification to your friend that has your call. So if I had a friend who was a Florida Gator, I could send Go Dogs to him or her, and she could send Go Gators back to me. And then it would keep score, as you can see on here. Very simple, kind of a playful, like notification-based app. But the one thing I want to do is point out the interactivity in this app. So first of all, pick your team. It's black, so it's kind of the standard position for heading. And then log in. Blue is going to be a go-to color for interactive text. And honestly, even if that was black, I think the position alone in the top right, and because it's surrounded over there, it would still be enough to know that you could log in, but the blue definitely kind of helps it out. All of these other ones are just simply based on the college team. So it's kind of a very simple and kind of oversimplified layout with just huge text. And then another kind of fun thing that would happen would be like whatever team you chose, your team's colors would then become the title bar color. A way to make sure that the interactive text on those title bars was truly interactive, I made it so the actual primary color would show up as that interactive color, and then bring in that secondary college football team color behind it. So for example, if you were to choose Army, your text would end up looking like the secondary color would be like that, and your primary color would look like that, even if your background was completely a different color. So that would be kind of like how that would work, primary and secondary. So there's subtle things that you can do to kind of make sure that primary text or secondary text, that it stays looking interactive. And one of the surefire ways to do that is going to be put a border around it with a reversed out color. And it doesn't matter if you're using dynamic color or some other examples of just using kind of a lighter color, which I'll show in just a minute, but just something that kind of sets it apart from something else that makes sure that it looks interactive. And you can see like down here, this text right here is intentionally kind of gray and not interactive looking, because I want it to just be more of a read-only kind of text. So you're not gonna get confused necessarily. Now this might be a place where I bend the rules a little bit, because I'm highlighting the label as blue when you're typing in it. And it might be better, to make it white as the highlight, but I wanted, even though we don't really have that much usage of the color blue, other than maybe like forgot password, and also on the login or change your team, you could cancel. When we're not currently in a team, we're using that blue as the interactive text color. So technically, if our blue text is interactive, that would mean that this is interactive, but it's actually not. So there's places where you can bend the rules a little bit when it comes to interactivity, but you do want to be mindful if you're bending that too far, because if I started making a lot of things blue, then you would start to diminish the value of that color as an interactive color. All right, so next I want to look at this app for 12 Stone. They have a really big database of people that exists already in their system. So they wanted to be able to, if someone had signed up at a certain event and someone had given their information at a service, and then they were signing up again on this app, they wanted a way to reconcile those multiple accounts. And they had some back-end systems that would monitor those people and just kind of try to reconcile that. So I wanted to show a visual way that someone could kind of help that process along. So this is what we came up with. All right, so this guy, Douglas, is signing up, and we have this kind of burgundy red as our primary color. And that's one pretty easy way to make sure that your text looks interactive is to pick a primary color, and anything you can tap on or click, it's that color. And that's kind of what we're doing here. Even though, we do have these secondary actions that are tappable as well, but they're not so primary. So picking a primary and secondary color for your text, we'll dive way more deeply into that in our color lessons, but it's just a great way to just start off with a primary and a secondary and let it be different, than your regular readable, read-only text. So we've got our burgundy text. We're going to sign up. We're going to either put in our phone number or skip. And it is worth mentioning that it's kind of a bad form to ask for phone number without telling the person why that number is being asked for. So right here, we're just saying if you're already in the system, providing your phone number will help keep your info in sync. So this is a way that we can kind of match you up. So if you do enter it, it's like, I want to know if I'm already in the system too. So maybe that's more encouragement to get in there. But it doesn't look like interactive text. Our interactive area is right in here where we're asking for the phone number. And we're going to go ahead and pull up that number pad by default as well. So it's a little bit more intuitive. So they enter their number and then we say, okay, is this you? Now, this text is really read only, so it's not necessarily interactive, but this module is interactive. So this is kind of one of those gray areas again, where it's like, okay, it's technically interactive because you can tap on it and select it, but at the same time, it is read only as well. So we're not going to make it red as our primary color, and we're not going to make it kind of toned down to our secondary color. So it's going to stay as the read only color, but we're introducing a little ring around the avatar, and that's going to be kind of like a souped up checkbox, as opposed to just having a square with a check in it. We'll just say, okay, if this is selected, then we'll put a red ring around it, which is our primary color. And I can check, okay, well, this is me, and actually this is me too. And then once I have selected that, then I can hit, yep, that's me. But you'll notice, like, if nothing is selected, this is not interactive. So we can subdue this interactivity and make it based off of a previous selection. So only then are we going to change it the same way that this is going to change. So right now my primary action is, nope, that's not me. But if I start selecting people, now you can't select not me. And when we're kind of toggling the interactivity between multiple elements based on that use case. So another thing to keep in mind is just that you're not going to be able to just design one static thing and that's going to be it. You're going to have to keep in mind the scenarios of past, present, and future as you design these things, and what different states things can take on. That's going to change the interactive colors that you're using in the designs. Check out a little bit more of this. We've got interactive text here for editing the picture, but it's not a huge in-your-face text size. It's a little bit lower. So typically speaking, the larger the impact of the interactive text, the larger and heavier and the more contrast that particular action needs to have. So if it's a primary action that's, save password, it's going to be a huge button. But in this case, edit profile picture, it doesn't need a huge amount of contrast because it's a very low level interactivity. So we can just simply use the red color, but keep it the same size as these little labels here. And that's just enough to let you know that you can edit your profile picture. Okay, next I want to look quickly at this project called Shiplify, which has a whole lot of information going on. So these are just a couple of exported screens. And this app is a commercial transportation logistics application. This is probably one of the most complicated projects I've worked on. And this was probably 5 or 6 years ago, so I can't remember all of the lingo necessarily. But one thing that I do know for sure is that in this app, people are looking for carriers to ship their product from point A to point B. So in this example, the one I really want to dig into is going to be this mobile version here. So it's a little bit easier to kind of digest and show what's going on. Okay, so we've got point A to point B. This is user input, and they've hit search, and they've also added some filters. I'm not going to go into all that too much. But you can see here, like, there is a lot of stuff going on here. We've got the title of the carrier who is going to send that information. We've got this kind of like code that the entire industry uses for the carriers, almost like airport codes. And then there are specific definitions about what that carrier is able to produce, like truckload, intermodal. Those are all things specific to that carrier. And it's all read-only text. All of this is basically read-only. And this price is going to be the price for the shipment, and it's going to start in Dothan, Alabama. And there's also going to be a lot of other terminals. It's going to make a lot of stops. The goal here is to get someone to click this entire thing, because that would mean I want to choose this route. But there's a lot of other variables at play here. They might want to call this particular city to ask them about some questions about pickup. And then right here, they might want to call the destination to ask them some questions about drop off. And there's other information like this is going to take 2 days. It's 545 miles. It is a delivery. This is the date when it needs to happen. And this text is definitely not accessible. I'm pretty sure that that's going to be a failing kind of thing. Like I said, this was done 5 or 6 years ago before I was a lot more into accessibility. And you can see that definitely fails with gray on this white. It'd have to be quite a bit darker to pass AA. I think it's 4.5. Yeah. So that'd have to be a little bit darker. So that was my mistake there. But, you know, things happen. That's a simple CSS change. But one thing I want to point out here is in addition to clicking on this entire thing to select it as the choice for the carrier, we've also got this like show all terminals link. And in retrospect, this should probably be green because it's kind of important. And I want that to be known as a very clickable item. I do think that with it being bold and because it's surrounded by this line and this dot, that it has a lot of implied interactivity to it. It also says show all terminals. But I do think if this was green, it would be maybe a little bit better, especially if that's an important thing to see. But basically, if you tap show all terminals, it will expand, and then you can see, okay, this is going to stop in Louisville, it's going to stop in Memphis, it's going to stop in Little Rock. And it's also going to pull up a little map of the actual route. And then you could close that out as well. But it's just another example of an interactive module which has a lot of read-only text, but the module itself, because it's got a border and it's a different color, it looks interactive. And there's also these blue interactive icons for making a phone call. There's also this interactive piece, and all of them do slightly different things, so they have to be styled in a slightly different way. Now, not everything you design is going to be so complex, but there's definitely going to be times where there are multiple things that someone can do within the same thing. And sometimes it makes sense to put them all in the same style. And other times when they're completely different, like choosing a search result versus showing a few more details versus making a phone call, those are probably going to be styled a little bit differently just so it will help out the context of that design. And last but not least, I want to show this SmartLine app again. And we talked about this helper text in our previous lesson about kind of text style definitions, but I also want to point out that this is another example of where I'm just simply using this kind of teal color to show the interactive nature of that button. So that's basically the primary color for interactivity, whether it's a checkbox active or it is changing a time on when your voicemail goes away. And this is another kind of example. Instead of using an underline, kind of use this kind of subtle background to imply a little bit more interactivity between bigger actions and lower level actions. So like, for example, recording a greeting gets more of a kind of that teal background color in addition to the teal action color because you're recording an actual voicemail. So that kind of ends up becoming the secondary action versus this primary action, which has a lot more contrast. That's basically dark gray with a white text that just kind of takes you to the next page. But then we're bringing in that same teal background to show you kind of like a version of a message that you might not have read yet. But it's not a full-on action the same way record greeting is. So we're reusing that background on top of the read-only text to show you a little bit more of a meaning. So we're kind of slightly putting that light color behind read-only text to give it a slightly different meaning. So your interactive text is going to be defined by the following properties. It's going to be defined by position, size, color, weight, and even the surrounding elements like borders, backgrounds, and icons off to the side. All of those things are going to add to whether or not your text looks like it's interactive or not. And remember, as a general rule, the larger the impact of the action, the more drastic the change in color or contrast or weight should be. So if you have those big actions, they're going to have more contrast. If you have lower level actions, maybe a little bit less contrast. And I don't always mean, like when I say contrast, it might not be color contrast necessarily. It might be all black and white, but it just has more visual impact. The higher the level, the interactivity, the higher of impact, kind of visual impact it should have, or probably will end up having. So for homework, I'm gonna get you to design an RSVP form, and I'm actually gonna do a quick little wireframe in Figma that you can kind of go off of, and that'll help me kind of explain what to do. So let's get that pulled up.